I want to welcome you all to this webinar about the timelines of WASH. And well, my name is Sjef Ernes, and I'm working for Stichting NICC, which stands for Netherlands International Cooperation Collective. And firstly, I would like to mention that this meeting will be recorded. And yeah, well, I'd ask of you to mute yourself during the presentation so that we can all listen to Sjef when he talks. And the questions can be asked in the chat function, and you can send them to everyone so that everyone can see the questions asked, so that we don't get 6 of the same questions perhaps. And they will be attended to after the presentation by Sjef. And well, most of you know Sjef. I'll give a short introduction about him. He's known as the previous CEO of Aqua for All, and where he retired last year. And he has a long water career in both the Netherlands and in Africa, and has been involved in the development cooperation for the past 20 years. He's also the founder of Wicked Water, which is a business involved in it's involved in business development in WASH interventions. And together with Dick van Ginhoven and with help from several colleagues, he's created these the WASH timelines. And well, I'd say, Sjef, take it away.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm very honored with the big interest that you have shown by subscribing for this webinar. I hope you will not regret it. It's not the first timeline that we are presenting on behalf of NICC. There were some very nice previous presentations, among others from Henk Holslag on hand pumps, rural hand pumps. Today, I will discuss with you the WASH timeline, and then very specifically WASH for peri-urban and rural situations. At the end, we will also say something about the urban water supply and sanitation timeline that is under construction. Let me try to share with you my presentation. That's always a challenge for people of 65 and older. This should do. Can you see the presentation? Yes, is it correct?
Yes, I think there we go. Yep.
Okay. As I said, this is the WASH timeline. Timelines, we are inspired by the timeline as it was built upon the history of the Netherlands. And what you try to do in a timeline is that you collect the highlights in history, but it means in the same time that you have to make choices. That's why I want to start with a disclaimer. The timeline certainly is not complete. What we did is we tried to identify policy developments. We tried to identify actors and instruments, some developments and lessons learned. But of course, I'm pretty sure that at the end of the presentation, you will say, oh, you forgot many more game changers, innovations, very interesting developments. So that is the second disclaimer. The timeline is a living document. We are selective, so we are certainly not inclusive. And last but not least, and I also saw that from your questionnaire, some people said, what can I get out of it? The timeline is very much meant to provoke questions. It will certainly not give you the answers. So those who are looking for a job, read the timeline and make your choice in what is an interesting field for yourself, but it will not find you a job, unfortunately, of course. This timeline was set up by identifying, in our view, some 6 quite important periods. So it is a chronological built-up WASH timeline, starting from the early 60s up to today. I will address some policy drivers during these 6 periods. I will highlight some few innovations that we have mentioned in the timeline. I would like to give you a nice example of a game changer. which is the sustainability clause. But we will end up, and I hope that is also food for thought for the discussion, we will end up, of course, with some trending expectations. What can we expect? What will be next? And do we see silver bullets? Looking at the WASH timeline itself, when the Second World War was over, you saw the UN coming up as a new organization, and within the UN there was an interest for addressing especially poverty. It was very much still charity driven, and we all the elder among us, they all know the Biafra war, drought and refugees, tremendous poverty, especially in Africa and Southeast Asia. Charity was then quickly transformed into solidarity before, in the 90s, the responsibility came very much on the agenda. Responsibility from the governments as the main actor on providing WASH facilities. And that was also the time that privatization became an issue, especially when public-private partnerships were explored to see how we can work together with private sector parties. At the same time, in 2000, also the Millennium Development Goals were declared. As you all know, the Millennium Development Goals that said we should halve the number of people without access to water, half the people without access to health, half the people who don't have access to education, etc., etc., etc. And that half the number of people without, that was a very strong policy. And at the same time, it was a very confusing policy, especially when government leaders said, then you tell me which half of the population I should forget. So the MDGs were a big stimulus, and at the same time, they had a problem in itself. The MDGs halfway came to the conclusion, we will not make it. That was while the second half of the 15 years of MDGs, we saw a huge enhancement and a more empowerment of the goals. Nevertheless, in 2015, we had to conclude that the MDGs did not succeed completely. And then we were confronted with the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, it is already now that we look at 2030 as the end goal of the Sustainable Development Goals. And some pessimists are convinced that we will not reach the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030. And that means that we have to think already about some either enhancement or what is next. I will come back to that later on. But that was very much the way how we established the timeline. Some examples of innovation. Well, the innovations, some people think on product development, others think on financial innovations. Very many people think on technology innovation. And last but not least, there were also quite some innovations on program concepts. I listed a few of them. I will not discuss them in detail, of course. But for instance, on the product development, you remember maybe the time when, especially when Bill Gates came up with that idea of a huge research program and development program on reinventing the toilet, something that was inspired also by aerospace, because the toilet for astronauts who already went to the moon from the early 60s, they had a very kind way of having a toilet on board that was able to produce the drinking water for the astronauts. That was in the 60s. Still, it's quite extraordinary that even today we still have half a billion people who don't have access to that safe water 60 years later. In finance, you will find also some innovation concepts. This is my mobile phone. I excuse myself for that. Sorry. On finance innovation, we were actually overwhelmed with a lot of innovation, especially when public-private developments came in. On treatment technology, innovation is always available, but the circularity thinking was a huge boost in innovation in technology. At the same time, the problem of water, especially for the resource of water, in terms of pollution of the sources like groundwater and surface water, that also provoked a lot of innovation on treatment technology for all kinds of pesticides, arsene removal, and so on. In the program concepts, actually, we find the real innovations. It was a consistent struggle to look for the silver bullet in what kind of approach would work. Who doesn't know what is the VLOM? Who doesn't know about privatization? Who didn't accompany the triple S ideas? What did we see on PPP developments? And most recently, what do we see in a very complex sanitation economy sector? What did we learn from Finnish? What did we learn from new developments like uptime on maintenance and operations security? There were quite some innovations. I'm not sure, but I think within the audience, we have quite some people who were very much involved in one of these innovation areas. I saw, of course, I saw Henk Holslag, who has been working on the hand pump innovations for a long time. I know that there are some people from waste in the room who were very much involved in rollout of the Finnish concept, the innovative, inclusive finance modeling to help people with access to money to provide themselves their own toilets. There was, of course, the last few years, a lot has happened on prepaid metering to secure actually revenues that are gained from water services and sanitation services. And with prepaid, you are pretty sure that you have your revenues to organize your operations and maintenance costs and to cover these costs. What is in the finance, it's actually where we see standstill in innovation. The finance sector itself is still very much traditionally judging concepts, developments, business cases from a very return on investment perspective. But even there, we see innovations in outcome payments so that we are capable to monetize social impact and to see whether this social impact being monetized, being valued, how it can help in finding the right blend for infrastructure finance and for second revenue streams. A lot to talk about. I hope maybe this will inspire you later on in the discussion to address some of these innovations. Nick asked me, was there a specific game changer that you encountered when talking about the timeline, and what are these kind of game changers? One of the game changers I liked myself is the one that the Foreign Affairs invented, I think early 2000, or 2010, something around that time, the so-called sustainability clause. Now, I'm not sure whether Dick van Ginhoven is in the audience, but Dick van Ginhoven was the one who came up with this idea. Is Dick in the audience? Because then Dick, I think it's much better that you explain a little bit what was the strength of this game changer.
Yeah, thank you, Chef. Yes, indeed I'm there. Thank you, and well, of course I can come back to that to that time. I think it was about 2004 or 5 that we realized that a lot of the facilities which were being built with grant funding from the Dutch government actually stopped functioning very soon. Particularly if you're looking at hand pumps, that was often the case. Many of the hand pumps didn't even reach 4 or 5 years. They broke down or at some stage needed spares, and there was not a proper provision in place for maintenance, nor was there financing. So by putting a sustainability clause in our financing from DGIS, we forced in some way our partners to what shall I say, to design a program or develop a program in such a way that the total lifespan, the economic life of that investment was taken into account. So in some way or the other, the tariffs had to be set to take care of operational maintenance costs, or alternatively, other financing from government side had to be secured to make sure that operation and maintenance was organized and financed. So I think that was indeed, at least for us, an important point in time.
Yeah, Dick, thank you very much. I know that Aqua for All at that time was one of your test cases, and I remember very well how difficult it actually was to take that sustainability clause not only serious, but how to incorporate it in your funding strategy, in your operation strategy, in your day-by-day marketing strategy for WASH interventions and WASH services. I will not ask you now, did it really change the game? I have the strong feeling that together with business and private sector coming in, it was at least it paved the pathway towards cost recovery and with that guarantee on a long sustained service standards.
Yeah. Can I make one remark here?
Please go ahead.
Sjef, that if the sector, the WASH sector, wants to deviate from just being a beggar, depending on donor funding or on government handouts, say for investment, they have to look at commercial financing. They have to start debt financing, as we call it, most probably based on revenues. And of course, revenues is a big and difficult issue. Tariffs are difficult, also particularly for poor people, but there are financial mechanisms for cost subsidizing. But the point I like to make is that if you want, say, private sector to enter into a debt financing, into lending water service provider money, then the most important thing, he wants to make sure that the installation remains functioning. Because if it stops working, people will not pay the revenues. So functionality is extremely important for revenue collection and for servicing a loan or a debt. So that's why I think the sustainability clause and the need for sustained functioning of the services means sustained revenues from the services, and that means potential creditworthiness of the service provider.
Yeah, you're perfectly right. I will come back to this issue when we are discussing a little bit some trending developments that we see in financial innovation later on. But thank you very much. There were many more opportunities to identify game changers. If you as an audience, if you read through the WASH timeline, you will certainly encounter yourself some other typical game changers. what makes it interesting is to see whether game changers lasted over time. Did they survive themselves, or were they overhauled, override later on? Game changers will be needed. That is at least a lesson from the timeline. Game changers will be needed sometimes, at least to boost a certain development, especially if we see that we are missing the targets on the long run. So I'm pretty interested to see whether people in the audience have other game changers on their radar, and whether that we should mention them in the timeline if we haven't mentioned them yet. Brings me a little bit to the end of my presentation, and that's also to allow more space for discussion and questions. But one of the people in the question, some of you asked, what can we learn from the timeline? As Lucky Levert says about NICC, NICC tries to value the history to strengthen the future. So at least it's an open door when you say that we should learn from the past, but we also could analyze the past and to see what kind of trending in developments do we notice, and which achievements were acting as a game changer. These would be the two challenges for me to use the timeline. Do we see developments that sustain, and do we see achievements that act as a game changer? And if you want some silver bullets, I wish to present you 4 bullet points that might be holder of a silver bullet opportunity. First of all, of course, in technology, we see a huge interest in circular economy, especially where scarcity is at stake. So, and the circular economy is much more than wastewater recycling. It's also more and more valuing waste streams as a source. We have people from waste in the audience, but I thought, I'm not sure, but I thought that also the Toilet Board Coalition joined our webinar. Maybe is Cheryl Hicks in the room, or is Alex Knevich, is she in the room? Because I think that the Toilet Board Coalition made a tremendous contribution to emphasizing the circular economy potential. Cheryl, are you there? I don't hear her. Alex, are you there? No, apparently not. Yes, are you cannot see them?
Yes, Sjef, I do not see them in the participant list at the moment. No.
Yeah. Okay. The Toilet Board, they addressed 3 areas of economic interest from sanitation. And why do I want to emphasize this? Because for me, it was a very interesting lesson learned. At this moment, it's in the sanitation sector. It's much more business driven than the drinking water. Not only in direct business opportunities like building toilets, providing the slabs, providing cleaning products for toilets, in all kind of areas, renting a toilet, sharing a toilet, toilets in transport. The number of innovations by entrepreneurs, social young entrepreneurs, they are enormous, numerous. The second field of interest for sanitation economy is found in the reuse of waste streams. And what gave a real boost was that we are able to mix human waste, so fecal sludge, urine, poo, we can mix that with other organic streams. And that is a very interesting business driver for producing organic fertilizer, for producing briquettes and pelleting products to be an alternative for charcoal. We see composting activities, we see biogas activities. So there is quite some opportunity to find in using waste streams as a business driver. And last but not least, it was found that not only drinking water, but especially sanitation contributes a lot to the health economy. And health economy is very much a data economy, because in health, you want to reduce costs, you want to invest most effectively in preventing health problems, and that is largely supported by data. And especially in the health sanitation area, we see a huge development in the data economy. So all the IBMs and the Microsofts and the Googles, they are really benefiting from the interest that sanitation can offer. For me, circular economy will be one of the most trendy, but also most promising trends in the next 10 years. The second bullet is very much on finance concept. I think Dick just mentioned it a little bit. Many services, especially if they are operated on a private way, at the long run, the revenues have to cover all the costs, including the capital cost, because it cannot be depending on subsidy alone. But if the revenues are not enough, if the tariffs are capped, if people are not able to pay contingently, then could we provide a second finance stream from impact or outcome perspective? And actually, there are three possible ways to use outcome payments as a contribution to the viability, the feasibility, the financing of business operations in WASH. And the first one, of course, is that imagine that together with private sector, we would be able to accelerate access to water and sanitation on a decentralized way. Think about mini grids, water kiosk, water bottling industry, home delivery. What would it be if the government would award this disclosure of households with a second revenue stream based on every household connected getting a fee from the government. The governments, the local governments, it's for them much cheaper than to provide the investments themselves. And at the same time, it would be an incentive for operators if they would have a second revenue stream from these outcome payments. Another possibility is, of course, that outcome payers say, we are not so much interested in investing in the business, but we are interested to invest in the outcome that will be reached. Think about health investors, think about agriculture investors who need the WASH sector, and especially the issues that we just mentioned, like providing safe water or like circular economy. If these two areas, the outcome payers on health and investors in the business would join forces, it would create a better position to fund the investments in infrastructure upfront. And there might even be a third possibility, and that is something that we try to figure out. Is this timeline confirming that third possibility? The third possibility would be if outcome payers would act as a kind of a risk mitigator, a kind of a risk guarantee, that if the impact is realized, but the business is not sustainable enough, would these impact investors or impact grantors be willing to take that risk? Because actually they get their impact, but the business is not taking the loss. The loss will be taken by this risk mitigators. Some food for thought, I hope. At least the timeline has shown that if we don't go that direction, even in 2025 and 2030, there still will be people without access to adequate wash facilities. The third one, the governance, is a simple one. We are all convinced by the timeline that we have to get out of silo thinking. Even the SDGs are very much siloed organized. We have 17 SDGs, of which 16 are working in a quite siloed, framed, with boundaries identified sectors. So the health sector, the wash sector, the agriculture sector, it's very difficult to help them in cross-bordering their activities and to provide a cross-sectoral approach. It's only SDG 17 who is enhancing partnerships, but even then it's more partnerships in the financing way rather than partnering in cross-sectoral approach. This is, for me, the most important challenge for the SDGs. Are they able to develop cross-sectoral programs? A very simple one is energy from waste. A very simple one is food security from compost. A very simple one is health improvement and health cost reduction from wash. But it is extremely difficult in practice. Maybe the COVID pandemic has made it clear to us that wash is an elementary facility, and it will help reduce costs on many more SDGs than only water. It will certainly have its impact on health and on economy. Last but not least, up to now, the timeline has shown that a lot of policy has always come from top down. It was the UN with its charity, with solidarity, with privatization, with the MDGs, with the SDGs. It is the UN target setting that is giving us direction and guidance in targeting in targeting interventions and potential. And I'm really curious, that would be a question to the audience, shouldn't we be much more bottom-up oriented and use the community feedback to identify what really works and scale and replicate what communities find as a sustainable development? That would be my ultimate challenge to the audience, to think a little bit about that. Is that something that we can learn from the past and that we can translate into future interventions? With that, I think I talked a lot. Before closing this timeline, at least there is another timeline under development. That is the timeline for urban water and sanitation. By far as important, if not more important, than this WASH timeline. The author of that, one of the authors of that timeline, is in the audience as well. I think Ad Sanne, are you there? Ad, can you say something about
hello
on water?
Hello, Sjef.
Hi.
And hello, participants. I was listening carefully to you, Sjef. Wonderful presentation and lots of food for thought. And immediately, of course, I was thinking about the work that I myself and Jan Willem Overbeek and Maarten Blokland have been doing on this urban water supply and sanitation timeline, because our focus has been on urban water supply, mainly on with a focal point the development of water utilities and the challenges and the changes that urban and semi-urban water utilities have been facing over the past decades. And obviously there's a very clear link, as you said, with the overall WASH development, because the major, let's say, policy directions were coming from those UN bodies and international programs. Now, it is very interesting to see in this urban water supply and sanitation timeline how these developments boil down at the level of the water utility, who at the end of the day is, of course, responsible for delivering the services to the urban and semi-urban populations, and at the same time keeping up a certain level of service standards, of performance standards, and coping with all these financial limitations, policy limitations, capacity constraints, etc. So there are so many interesting developments, maybe not all of them game changers, but what we have tried to do is to sketch the development from when it all started maybe in the 19th century, when water supplies emerged, and then moving through the stage of, let's say, the major and big infrastructure water supply developments, then followed by urban sanitation and the governance and management challenges that were coming up. And then, of course, the emerging of the concept of water as an economic good, the call for improved efficiency, also mentioned just now, the functionality of systems had to be guaranteed. And then at the current stage, of course, climate resilience. So there were so many relevant developments to be shown, is that we've developed an overall timeline and a couple of timelines, which for example dealing with issues of governance and management, which are again closely related to the WASH. We talk about corporatization, PPPs, regulation developments, capacity development. We also have developed a sub-timeline for water as an economic good, because there you come into aspects of demand management, developments in cost recovery, water pricing, asset management, not to forget, and then a separate sub-timeline for improving efficiency, where we see the developments of benchmarking, non-revenue water exercises, energy efficiency, etc. So I think a very complex timeline, also impossible to make it, yeah, let's say full coverage. Yeah. But I think it will be interesting to have a similar discussion. I hope at the beginning of next year that we will be able to present it. Thank you, Sjef.
That sounds promising. Timeline on urban water supply and sanitation. There will be certainly some overlap and some similarity between this timeline. At the same time, it addresses complete different issues, as you just mentioned. We look forward to it. For now, I will stop sharing my screen and then see your faces again, hopefully. And maybe, Rana, can you help me? Are there some questions from the audience?
Yes, there are definitely some questions, and I see some interesting discussions going on. I want to highlight, first of all, a question of Henk. He's talking about more game changers, and he asks about self-supply. So can NGOs and governments supporting self-supply become a game changer?
Well, it's certainly not me who is the one who should answer that question. But Henk, I think it aligns a little bit in where I ended my presentation, in at least pledging some more bottom-up approaches. And I think that we have a lot of examples, and you have a lot of examples of successful self-supply. And it is a very simple one, a very simple method that can be replicated. And sometimes scaling is easier in replicating what works rather than scaling up what is already quite enormous and infrastructure sensitive. So I think I can agree with you that self-supply could be a game changer, especially if we, as the donor community in the Western side, if we would esteem self-supply as a successful and very low profile, replicable opportunity. So I can, but maybe what is your opinion yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I've been working for a long time already in self-supply, but I was very triggered by a webinar of the Rural Water Supply Network a few weeks ago that investigated that over 60% of all the WASH investments is done by families themselves. So not just sanitation, but also water supply and hygiene. And, you know, many families invest themselves if, of course, they have the money. And having water at premises, which is one of the ESG indicators, you know, the new indicator is having safely managed water at premises. If people have self-supply, they at least have it at premises, and having water at premises, especially in rural areas, has many more benefits than just the SDG 6. You know, it helps SDG 1, 2, 3, even 8. So the next question is, should and could NGOs and governments not support much more the scaling of self-supply? Because it has a huge impact on economic development. And as also Sanne said, we need more water for economic development, and self-supply is a typical example of water for economic development. So that is why I pledge for recognition and support of NGOs and governments to support self-supply, scaling self-supply.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I see another interesting question. So Jessin mentions that WASH interventions have been given due importance after the International Year of Sanitation in 2008. And the question from Jessin is, apart from numbers from joint monitoring reports, what have been the economic and social gains from various WASH programs?
First of all, I think we have not enough data to answer that question. There's never been a real in-depth study on let's say, but in my words, on monetizing the impact of very successful WASH interventions. Of course, WSP, for the elder among us, the World Bank program on water and sanitation, has done a lot on identifying the negative costs, the non-action cost, what happens if we don't provide WASH services, and they have shown the health cost and the labor improductivity and the time that is lost on spending hours and hours fetching water and so on and so on. So they have very much identified the non-action costs, but I think there is still a huge challenge for us to identify data, to collect and analyze data, and then also to give feedback, to get feedback from the community. on this data in terms of positive effects in economy, in poverty reduction, in income generation, in well-being and welfare. To my opinion, data is not yet enough available. But if others have a different opinion on that, or are much more optimistic, I challenge you to make it, to raise your voice. Maybe by raising your hand or something. Yeah, I see Ger Haan.
Yes, and Jeroen also.
Yes.
Yes, can you unmute Ger?
Ger, we can't hear you yet. You are not unmuted yet. Yes, sir? He is gone for coffee, I think.
No, I am trying to find Ger here on the list.
Ger Haan. And otherwise, Jeroen is already unmuted. Jeroen, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you for this presentation, and hello to everyone. Good to see many of you back again after so long. But I cannot agree more about the importance of data, Sjef. And I think this is one of the parts of the timeline that I think deserves more attention, because we know so much more than we used to know, although we have not even started exploring all the benefits from the data. And a very important trend, what I think that we overlook, is looking at those big tech companies that are using the data and are exploiting fully, also in Africa, which is happening now, is unbelievable and unprecedented. We see it already with the super platform in agriculture. They will come also online in the water sector, but not in its own sectoral context, but in the context of development. The next phase will be about data. And I think us as a sector are not prepared for that. And I think one of the not only unexploited parts of the sector is the use of data and act and learn about it. But this will be the huge chance in the coming 5 years if Africa is fully connected to the internet and data becoming widely available and not only stolen.
Thank you, Jeroen. Ger Haan, can you add a little bit on that?
Yes, please. That's exactly why I'm in this webinar at the moment. I'm new in this area. I used to be an econometrician and a pioneer in health technology assessment. So in the 80s, the government in Holland, they made more or less a copy of what was in America about new medical technology assessment. And we installed the Institute of Medical Technology Assessment back in the 80s. Now I come to the circular economy. I used to work for 30 years in the financial area. And now I'm for half a year in this area. And I'm absolutely surprised how we are not able to collect data and to bring them together in order to make clear that water is so absolutely important for the health and for the whole society and for Mother Earth. So please let us join in collecting data and prove how important this item is, because in health technology assessment is absolutely dead sure that water nutrition was the factor that improved health all around the world. Every health technology assessment person knows that. And we can prove that nowadays all over the world, that it's good for Mother Earth.
Yeah, it adds to what I said on what the Toilet Board Coalition has been doing in this data, and it was not surprisingly that the aerospace agencies are very much involved in that area. Me myself, I'm quite intensively involved in a development together with CERN in Geneva, and we all know CERN as an institute of electrons and smaller, the quantum pieces, but they have a very interesting vision on data networking. And they are now developing a huge program on providing data to be selective and comparable and competitive in what works and what doesn't work. And that is, of course, food for thought for financiers, because financiers, they only believe facts and figures. They don't believe missionaries like me.
I'm absolutely in the middle of this point right now, because I'm collaborating with a unique firm in the Netherlands, in Maastricht. Okay. And what we did for the last few months is validating data, proving that it has effect. Otherwise, you don't have any chance at any finance person or bank or whatever.
Yeah. Rana, allow me, I was reading through the chat. I would like to put John Oldfield on the spot, because he addresses a different topic, which is advocacy. And he thinks advocacy should be even a game changer. John, are you willing to share a little bit your thoughts? I know you from previous time, but you are now in the Global Water 2020. And I think we would appreciate your vision. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Sjef, good afternoon. Thank you, everybody. Just in 30 seconds, there's a lot of great, compelling arguments in the chat, in this discussion so far. More innovative finance, innovative technologies, WASH as a human right, public-private partnerships, and so on. It strikes me, and of course I'm biased, I work in an advocacy organization, but that professional WASH advocacy across the developing world, using any number, using the appropriate rationales, the appropriate local arguments, might be that game changer. And I don't say this because I work in an advocacy organization. I say this because the Dutch government has a strong story to tell of its support for professional WASH advocacy over the years. So it strikes me as advocacy as an opportunity to step back from the trees, take a look at the whole picture, and really, if I might explain it this way, pave the two-way street between citizens and their governments, using water and sanitation, using sustainable water and sanitation as that vehicle. I think advocacy is underweighted, is under-recognized, is under-capitalized in the WASH sector. So I'm actually, I hope that will be a game changer of the future. I hope that I'll be able to find additional human, financial, technical assets to professionalize advocacy for WASH across the developing world using any number of these different rationales and arguments. Thank you, Sjef.
But allow me to challenge you a little bit further on this. I mean, during my experience in Agrofol, we also thought every time again advocacy is really important. At the same time, and I'm not sure whether I'm the only one, but I think a lot of advocacy that has been happening throughout the periods that we have looked at in the timeline, advocacy was very much a broadcasting activity. And I really missed the voice of the beneficiaries, and even beneficiary is a terrible word, but we've missed the voice of the community itself. That's why I deliberately in my presentation made a link between feedback from communities, community feedback with data to strengthen their voice. And maybe that could interfere with the advocacy from the top down, which has been done by your organization yourself, by UN, by governments, by donors. But there's a football club in the Netherlands who says no words but deeds or something like that. It's a terrible English expression, but it means walk the talk.
Yeah.
Can you help me in bridging the community feedback data collection with your advocacy pledge?
Well, Sjef, thank you again. Yes, advocacy can take a lot of different shapes. What we're most familiar with is global and regional and national level advocacy, where people are targeting heads of state, heads of government, finance ministers, wash is a human right, the broad global arguments. But what's, I think, perhaps most compelling in the advocacy space is exactly what you're talking about. Advocacy at a community level, at a what we would call a subnational level or a local level. You know, in my country, in the United States, every neighborhood has its own clean water association, its clean water nonprofit, holding governments accountable, typically in a very proactive, friendly fashion, but sometimes not. I think advocacy has to be local. Water challenges are local, water solutions are local, and water advocacy has to be local. My closing comment is that there's simply not enough professional, meaning people being paid money to do advocacy for WASH at very local levels. You know, we talk about India, for example, 1.3 billion people. There should be a really good WASH advocate in India. Well, there should be really good WASH advocates, not simply in India, but every state, every panchayat in India should have its own local professional WASH advocacy group, as we do here, as you do in the Netherlands, and so on. I feel strongly that that's, let me rephrase that. That's a game changer that I'm going to be considering very much. And I think it's the only path that we have to accelerate progress to have any chance of meeting the sustainable development goal of 100% coverage by 2030.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Can I say what, please?
Please go ahead.
That's in here. So my video is not very good and the signal is not very strong. Yeah, thanks for discussing about this issue about collecting data. I happen to be advising in a country in West Africa for WASH and also consulting for UNICEF. There's a second point which I made. There's a need to a national WASH master plan, which is inclusive. When they're planning it, we've done it in one place in Nigeria and also Sierra Leone, whereby each and every sector has got a component in that master plan, and all the sign for it. There are about 8 ministers signing the WASH plan, and I hope it's still going on right now. And when it comes to, when we talk about developing countries, there are different levels of development. There are some countries which are in forest areas, there are some arid areas, and some in the desert. So when it comes to issue of water, for some of us who come from water-rich region, we say water is free. We knew that water was free. And when it comes to sanitation, it depends on who you're talking with. Because at village level, like maybe in Tanzania or in East Africa, at village level, room is enough for them because they see that sanitation is an urban issue. Now, those two beliefs, coupled with the third one, that diseases are actually brought in. People didn't have that diseases, these wash-related diseases. They say these are traveling diseases. So when you go to involve the communities who are actually the ones who we are targeting here, we need to break these three things into true perspective, how we see it. Because having a toilet is very important, it's very expensive to manage. Water is never free because it's potable water. Of course, it's free from the stream, but how it's held until from the stream to the mouth. The stream can be very nice water, yes, up to the volcano or mountain, whatever. But handling, that's where the cost comes in. And of course, the management of that water to benefit everybody else is a national issue. But now, I'm happy that we both agree that there's data scarcity in terms of what WASH has benefited the global community in terms of health and economy. So I'm very happy to see this happening, that in the timeline that now we make data the next issue. We'll give data a priority for the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yassin. I think you spoke the right words, especially, and what I take from this discussion is that with the possibilities that we have to provide the data to show the benefits, we can also be more selective in where to give emphasis and what to replicate and what to scale. rather than staying in the traditional programming of large infrastructure alone. Anyway, there are some more questions I see, but also people who are leaving. At least a little bit in line with what Mr. Yassin said. There was a question in the from one of the participants on how can we help those low and middle income countries who are simply not capable in being adoptive and adaptive in climate change adaptation, which is it's a huge precondition actually to make WASH intervention successful. I'm not sure who was the one who raised that question on how can we help these countries in being adaptive, but if anyone says, I have an opinion about that, I challenge him to take the floor. And otherwise, we all have the same problem. We don't know how to challenge that one and how to tackle that one.
Sjef, may I just...
Yeah, Dick.
Yes, hello, Sjef. Hello.
Yeah, just one point.
Dick, sorry.
Yeah, I think
we have two persons who want to react. I see Network AID. Who is that?
Sure. It's Network 8 from Sierra Leone, definitely. I'm outside. Sorry, the place is somehow hot, so I'm taking some fresh air.
That's COVID proof. That's good. Yeah.
Yes. I think there is a lot that I think we can do. First of all, it's about decentralization. And we've seen in many countries where, well, I don't want to speak for Europe, you know, I actually want to talk around Africa and the sub-Africa region. In terms of helping medium country in getting solution to that, we need to ensure that decentralization takes place. We've seen that many African countries, or maybe Asia, the issue of water and sanitation is more like centralized. And most of the decisions are taken by multilateral organizations, you know, either the World Bank, the IMF, or African Development Bank, you know, in providing some of this water and sanitation facilities in the rural areas, and maybe giving contracts to contractors who want to, with the sole aim of making profit. You know, so if they want to make the sole aim of making profit, you know, and then the water and sanitation issues is centralized, then there is an issue towards that. You know, so decentralization, especially to the local governance level, you know, need to be the way forward. And then when that happens, then it becomes very easy for the generation of data, you know, because we spoke about data. I mean, you cannot have community feedback, you know, when there's a huge gap, you know, from the rural areas to the central, you know, to the central government, you know, especially for ministries and departments, you know, that leads on water and sanitation. For instance, maybe you have a ministry of water, you know, and maybe a department who also will be supplying water at different level. You know, some are supplying it at central level, meaning at the urban areas, and others are supplying it at the rural or district level, and at the same time being supervised by a particular ministry at the central level. So because of the disconnect for the local governance not being involved in terms of taking decisions, involving in negotiations, in awarding the contract either to organizations that are actually providing the services or that are actually doing all of those things. I mean, the data will not be there, and the community feedback will not be there. So when Yasin talk about data and then we says that, I mean, there's not lack of data. I will put it that, I mean, this goes to the financiers that are actually, or the bigger donor that are actually funding water and sanitation across Africa, you know.
Okay.
And the last point I want to make is that if we allow the generation of easy to use equipment, you know, especially for those that are actually providing the technologies, you know, when you talk about self-supplied, we've seen where households are spending more on water supply than even health itself, you know, which the data is not captured, you know. So that data is not captured, especially in the urban and peri-urban areas. You know, for the rural areas, there is no way, I mean, people are paying for water. I mean, in the rural areas, there's no way they are paying for water, but in the urban and peri-urban areas, you know, huge households are actually paying for that, for water, but that is not captured. So maybe if we go in that line, then we'll be able to solve the problem in terms of data collections and also helping low and medium income countries in terms of solving the issues. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much. I'm not going to summarize what you said, but I think the triangle that you experienced between involving the local actors, local governments, the local authorities, and the data, and then the feedback from communities, it could work at least for rural and peri-urban areas, but even in the urban areas. I would like to ask you, please leave your email address behind so that we can catch up your contribution later on. In the meantime, I noticed it's already past 1 o'clock. The webinar would be until 1 o'clock. I see many more interesting questions, and I think we have to think within NICC what we can do with this. At least I see also some contributions that I'm personally interested to take up the discussion to a further level. For now, I propose that we stop here. I'm looking at the boss, Lucky. You are in charge of NICC. What do you think? Should we stop here? And if so, please would you like to close this meeting?
Yeah, for me, we could continue if there's somebody. I thought somebody who asked already for a few times if she could share some experience in TRACFIN Mali. So
yes.
I was wondering if we should do that separately or if we.
If it is Mahamane Baraku, excuse me the pronouncing difficult. If you're still there, please let us know what you have in mind, and let's continue later on. But please, the floor is yours.
No problem. Okay. In fact, I want just to talk about data collection in WASH financial activities in Mali. So, on the third stage of TRACFIN in Mali. So, what data shows is the major buyer of the WASH sector is the households. You know that we have not captured all data, but we have not captured the household investments in the facilities. That is our problem. But discuss about the functionality of water infrastructure. Sorry for my English.
No, but you are underlining, I think, one of the main observations in this webinar is that we all acknowledge the role for data collection, but very much also data analysis, and then using the data to confront them with the real data, and that is always coming from the community feedback. I mean, even if the infrastructure is realized, we would like to hear from the people, but does it work? And does it meet your expectations? And does it meet the quality standard that was promised? And that would be a very important issue for either outcome payers or investors or commercial bankers or philanthropy. Given all this, I'm very satisfied that so many people survived the 1 hour and are still on the hook. Nevertheless, we have to stop here.
Okay.
I saw a lot of gratitude from people who left already. I give the floor to Luki.
Yeah, I hope you can see me, because I'm recording as well, and I can't see the screen. Well, thank you, Jesse, and thank you, Rana, for helping to organize this webinar. It's really very encouraging for the Stichting NICC, Netherlands International Cooperation Collection. There's so many young people are joining now and helping with the timelines. And thank you very, very, very much, Sjef, for this inspiring presentation. I want to send the flowers to you, but it's difficult at this moment. Thanks to all the participants for their questions, for their remarks. It's very encouraging. And I think this webinar and the other webinars are a proof that the aim of our organization, that we want a mission to facilitate a sustainable future by building on the past. This is a proof of it. And NICC is planning to do more webinars. And we also like to encourage sharing knowledge between young professionals and experienced professionals. We think they can inspire each other. We are also planning to do some speed dating between experienced and young professionals. And then I think people have more opportunities to ask their questions and get answers. So in the future, follow the LinkedIn, the Facebook, our websites, and yeah, I hope to see more people on the NICC websites and engage in our organization. So thank you very, very much, all of you.
Okay, and the same to you all. Yeah, thank you very much.